Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the GENEDRIVE PLC results investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during today's meeting, given the attendance on today's call. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and we will send you an email to notify you when they are ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we would like to submit the following poll, and I'm sure the company will be most grateful for your response. And I'd now like to hand over to Matthew Fowler, CFO, and David Budd, CEO from GENEDRIVE.
So good afternoon, Mark, and thanks everyone for joining us today to review the company's activities and progress for our fiscal year to June 2021. As Mark mentioned, I'm David Budd. I'm the Chief Executive of GENEDRIVE, and I'm joined today by Matthew Fowler, who's our Chief Financial Officer. Presentation follows our results released from Tuesday of this week. There were lots of questions submitted to us prior to the presentation, and so we've had the opportunity to address some of those within the slides, and so there's some additional detail in there for you as well. I think despite our well-documented challenges last year, we are looking forward very optimistically with several innovative products on the market, and we've used the past year to develop two very new exciting tests which are at launch phase. We believe that both of these new products are highly attractive propositions and present an opportunity for significant long-term value to the company and to investors. For those of you new to the company, we should, I guess, just start from the understanding that our tests run off a common technology platform housed within our GENEDRIVE instruments. It's a low-volume DNA amplification technology capable of yielding genetic analysis in as quickly as 10 minutes, or in some cases, perhaps even faster. The technology is now a tried and proven platform with positive clinical data. It's a peer-reviewed data independently generated, all of which demonstrate that these systems work very well as described. And I think from a technology perspective, we think of them as effectively de-risked. We have a number of near-term and exciting opportunities, as I mentioned, which have the opportunity to drive revenue, and we believe our device and our tests have clear competitive advantages for our target applications. So the GENEDRIVE device is essentially a portable genetic reader, as I mentioned, and it gives information about genetic sequences. So specific genetic sequences can then be interpreted by the device to give information to a person around whether they might be infected or not, if they're a carrier for a specific mutation, or if they would benefit from a specific therapy. The device amplifies or magnifies DNA into a quantity that can be analyzed, and a significant advantage of the product is both its ease of use and its speed. As I mentioned, it's now been extensively performance validated by the U.S. Department of Defense, by FIND, the Foundation for Innovation in New Diagnostics, and extensively here in the UK last year by the NHS. The instrument itself is cartridge-based, meaning that every test requires the purchase of a new cartridge to run the test, and the unit itself is operated by just inserting the cartridge into the front of the instrument and either pressing the start button, which is located in the photo on the top left, just on the front of the screen, or on the bottom left there from our new interactive touchscreen version. It's very simple to use, as I mentioned, and it's been shown to be able to be accurately used by people that have no previous experience in diagnostic testing at all. So as I mentioned, our near-term revenue will be driven by antibiotic-induced hearing loss, or AIHL as we shorten it to, and the GENEDRIVE COVID-19 ID kit, which is our new point-of-care test for COVID-19. All of the assays that are listed here on this slide will have more detail on slides that follow. So this is just a quick overview. At the top, in 2020, a large-scale NHS trial was completed for our GENEDRIVE MTRNR1 test, which is the formal name for the AIHL product. And this has informed and prepared us for the very first phase of product launch, which we initiated in October. We have overcome lots of technical issues in the development of our point-of-care COVID-19 assays. We're at the very final stages now that are needed to support or generate the supporting data for CE marking and its subsequent launch. And these two new products build upon our already existing portfolio of Bioplex, which is our range of tests for military applications, as well as our GENEDRIVE HCV test. So all four of these assays, AIHL, COVID-19, Bioplex, and HCV, all run on the GENEDRIVE platform itself. Last year, we also developed a high throughput product called the GENEDRIVE 96 SARS-CoV-2 test, which is independent of the platform. It's not a GENEDRIVE platform product. And I think, obviously we're all frustrated about the lack of commercial traction around this high throughput test, which only generated around $500,000 in the last period. And this was mainly driven by a failure to gain, the critical emergency regulatory clearances that we needed in a timely fashion in the markets which we were targeted. And this obviously is a very key issue, which we've all recognized and are disappointed about. But we've tried to correct, I think, our errors for this in our go-to-market strategy for our two new upcoming product introductions. And I'll go into a little bit of detail about that as well. So I think we do have reason to be confident that we have a compelling product offering, that we're able to go to market in conjunction with good focused partners and able to generate significant and sustainable revenue for the company. So the first product that we're going to review is our antibiotic-induced hearing loss test, which is formerly known as the GENEDRIVE MT-RNR1 ID kit. So this is a test that's been in development in conjunction with the NHS for the past 3 years. So many of you will have heard about this during its development pathway. The test is unique to GENEDRIVE as a point of care test, and it does represent the world's first use of point of care molecular testing in a neonatal intensive care setting. The test screens for a genetic mutation called RNR1, and those with the mutation will suffer lifelong hearing loss following the administration of the common antibiotic gentamicin. The test screens babies for this mutation, and if it's found, they can be given an alternative treatment which preserves their hearing. So this is so-called guided therapy. We estimate a total available market of approximately 100,000 tests per year in the UK, and approximately 5 to 6 times that in Europe, and 5 to 6 times that in the United States. So it's a very substantial market relative to where we are. In terms of progress, we spent much of 2020 and the beginning half of 2021 completing clinical performance validation work with our NHS partners at the Manchester Royal Infirmary. The results of the trial have been accepted for publication in a top influential American pediatric scientific journal, which will be ideal to raise the awareness and visibility of GENEDRIVE and our new test. So we'll shortly have an excellent publication to powerfully evidence the product's capabilities. The results have been presented at a conference recently by MRI, so I can disclose that 3 MT-RNR1 positive babies were discovered from the 750 that were screened. There were no incidents of incorrect negatives, and the trial found that the test is easily accommodated into current care protocols. It has been demonstrated that the test will save the NHS money overall versus the long-term cost of deafness, and of course, this improves the life opportunity of potentially hundreds of children every year. So we have the opportunity to be the very first company to support a new standard of care in the NHS and potentially around the world. A number of suggested improvements were made by the NHS users to the device, which has led to the creation of a new generation GENEDRIVE product, which is pictured in the middle of the slide there. And I'll briefly cover that on the next slide as well. It incorporates improvements mainly centered around IT and user ergonomics. In terms of outlook, this is a new test being used in a new market, and we have the benefit and opportunity to leverage the excellent advocacy and goodwill that we've generated through our work with the Manchester hospitals and their clinicians during the development of the test with them. So we've divided our initial launch essentially into 2 phases, one of which is a key opinion leader or KOL phase, and the second is a more broad commercial launch. We're executing a plan related to the UK separately from the one for Europe. KOL launch is focused at the people that have been involved in the trials to date and close clinical collaborators of theirs. The publication of the performance data really is needed to support a full commercial launch in phase 2. Implementation of the first 5 KOL instruments is currently scheduled for the first week of December. As a consequence of the recent fundraise, we've expanded our business development team to work in conjunction with new distribution partners and our existing partnership with Inspiration Healthcare. and also allow us to expand to new partnerships in selected European Union countries. Developing payment pathways, engaging with clinicians, and promoting and establishing formal clinical guidelines as all viewed as being really important activities to maximize the market opportunity for this product. So following KOL and commercial traction in the UK, as I mentioned, we will expand into EU markets. We already have our initial pilot site up and running in Greece, and our business development team is focusing on European expansion, so very, very early in the new year. Now our focus, on the UK and the EU means that we won't require any additional regulatory clearances. We have mentioned that the USA is a very attractive market and that we have every interest to enter once funding can be established, recognizing that the FDA process is costly and time consuming. Excuse me. So here's the new GENEDRIVE system that was developed following feedback from our performance trials at the Manchester hospitals. Effectively, most of the improvements that we've incorporated are driven around data communication and ergonomic workflow improvements. So this is the very first time that GENEDRIVE has been targeted for use in effectively a modern hospital environment. Traditionally, we focused on more rural, decentralized, potentially less sophisticated settings. So here we needed to add modern data communication. So for example, the ability to hook directly into a hospital information system and transmit data directly into that. We needed to have the ability, for example, to scan a nurse's ID barcode so that user access can be controlled and monitored. And ultimately, there was a request from the nursing staff to develop a very streamlined and bespoke graphical user interface specific to neonatal intensive care unit requirements, which we've done for them. So the other major change was a lock-in capability for the cartridge, simply because during the trials, we had some errors related to users being uncertain if they had fully engaged the test cartridge properly in the instrument. So I think in summary, it represents a very, very exciting opportunity for the company. We've developed a very innovative product that's been shown to work effectively now in an NHS environment. We've responded and addressed to essentially every observation during the development trials and put those into the new GENEDRIVE system to support the AIHL rollout more broadly. We've got an excellent commercial partner established, in the UK for our rollout. It's a commercial assay that's unique to us. It's got easily demonstrable health, economic, and clinical benefits, and we're able to serve markets directly or engage additional focused specialist distribution partners. We've got good clinical advocates for us backing the performance and the rollout of products in the UK, and we've got a product which presents us with a great opportunity to make a very significant difference in the standard of care of infants. So it's something that we are very proud of, and I think investors should look at very positively in terms of opportunity for the company going forward. The second product in the presentation is our point of care SARS-CoV-2 test. This is a rapid point of care test running on the GENEDRIVE device that generates positive results in as quickly as 10 minutes. So while most countries remain below ideal vaccination thresholds, we now understand that while vaccinated people generally don't suffer from severe infection, they still can transmit COVID-19 to a lesser degree. It seems broadly accepted now that COVID-19 is not a disease that's going to be eradicated soon, but a disease that will require long-term management through testing and treatment, which is now becoming available. Noticeable is the more recent news of the oral antiviral drug efficacies. Individuals also, often only have initial symptoms when SARS-CoV-2 is reaching its peak replication. And this is the time in which antivirals would effectively be the most efficacious. So accurate and rapid molecular tests may play a very important role in patient management in detecting infection as soon as possible. All that said, vaccination does lead to lower infection rates, making targeted, lower throughput, application-specific testing approaches like that offered by GENEDRIVE point of care test a preferred approach, we believe, going forward. I'll come back to the finishing off that slide, but I just thought toggle forward. This is a very busy slide. It will get uploaded to the company's website, and you can copy it from there, so you don't necessarily need to do screen captures of this. I'm not going to go through a lot of detail here, but I think we need to just put it into context, looking at the European marketplace anyways, there's probably a dozen companies with point of care offerings for SARS-CoV-2. And here I've created this slide on the left with sort of the international players, Abbott, Roche, Thermo, etc. And on the right are more UK specific suppliers, which you might be more familiar with. Now, first thing to say is that the landscape differs quite dramatically from high throughput COVID testing, where there are probably 600 to 700 different suppliers in the market now. So it is a much more focused competitive field. The key advantages to the GENEDRIVE system against the competitors are highlighted here on the chart. Green, where we feel we have a competitive advantage, amber, where it's maybe neutral or slight advantage, or red, where we don't think competitors have the best possible solution. So I think the key things are that the GENEDRIVE test targets multiple genes, right? We know that that's important with the emergence of new strains. For example, things like Delta, targeting multiple genes is a necessary component of a test to ensure accuracy. The test, as we see it currently, is the fastest in the market. And we've previously said that you would get results in as quickly as 10 minutes. In our current trial work, it does in fact look that the positives, or some positives anyways, may resolve more quickly than that. And negatives probably actually resolve faster than the 20 minutes which we initially determined. So exact specifications, of course, come from the clinical trial work, which is currently in its final stages. Room temperature storage for reagents is important because that means that testing is practical outside of a formal laboratory setting where they don't have fridges and freezers. And the test itself doesn't require any additional laboratory components because that's often incompatible with the people and the skill set of a point of care setting. So we think that those four things, although none of them are specifically unique to us, the combination of having that suite of features will provide a competitive advantage for the company and make the GENEDRIVE system an attractive option in the marketplace. So as I mentioned, clinical validations in its final stage slowed really just due to the availability of samples from our clinical partner site. So I'll just toggle back to the previous slide and just finish that one off. In the middle here, or at the bottom, excuse me, is an overflow of the workflow of the point of care test. And you can see the parallels with the lateral flow test. It is identical essentially to lateral flow testing. A sample is taken from the patient's nose, the swab is placed in a buffer, it gets mixed to release the virus. The swab is sort of squeezed into the fluid, swab's removed and then discarded, and then the liquid gets deposited into the GENEDRIVE cartridge. Now, one drop is placed in each of the wells of the cartridge, and then the cartridge gets placed into the instrument. You press start, and you'll get a result in, as I said, something slightly less than 10 to something slightly less than 20 minutes. Now, during our development, since the last time we talked about this, we have moved away from the dropper bottle that was originally part of this workflow because we found that its dispense accuracy was variable from one user to the other when we were doing validation of the product. So a new disposable, what's called pastette, which is this little plastic dropper, is now part of the kit components. So we're still running clinical samples to get the overall cohort of data that we need for CE marking. And as I mentioned, it's taken longer than expected, primarily due to the rate at which our R&D team have been able to acquire these clinical samples from our clinical partner site. Then often in the validation of diagnostic tests, companies are able to use remaining patient samples that have previously been used in another test, or they can purchase stored samples from commercial sources. But because the GENEDRIVE test uses a fresh swab into a proprietary buffer, those traditional sources of samples haven't been usable for us. So we need to collect specific samples for our validation work, and just the incoming rate of receipt of those samples hasn't been as fast as we would have needed. But we've said imminently, results due imminently in our results commentary. By imminently, we mean days or weeks. We're not talking months here. We are very close. In order to get that overall clinical data set together, and then that assigns the performance characteristics of the kit. So provided all of that looks good, we'll certify for CE marking shortly, but then there is a small additional time period for CE marking on top of that now that the UK is not part of the EU. So we need to make an application through our US-based authorized representative. Again, it's not it's not burdensome, but we've paid for accelerated review, and that's normally around 10 days or so. So reasonably quick and a paperwork formality. In terms of outlook, once our data is all confirmed, puts us in a position to hand the product over to the commercial partners, which we've been engaging over the past many months. They'll be able then to evaluate product in their own hands, choose markets, give forecasts, and execute on agreed commercial plans. So we're aware of the increased requirements from the UK government, which were recently published to put product on the market here. It doesn't really impact our commercial planning, as we actually had always initially intended to go to the European Union first. But of course, we do intend to follow in the UK. There is a requirement, which is sort of is in excess of CE marking in terms of sample sizes and things of that. So we'll continue to recruit samples and go through the desktop review required for the UK market shortly. In terms of where the product will be targeted, there's a wide variety of environments that require molecular tests and require rapid molecular tests. So it's important to remember that while lateral flow tests may be inexpensive and rapid, the fact that they're not very accurate means that they're not a first choice for many specific applications. I think travel is probably a well-known example. So a point of care test like GENEDRIVE offers should be analytically superior to lateral flow virtually in every way, except for cost. It will be more expensive. As such, we're targeting environments that require PCR level sensitivity or are more interested in accuracy over cost. So these environments include things like travel, specifically urgent travel, high value occupational health settings, things like elite sports, businesses, cruises, fee-paying schools. There's lots of environments where this product can be useful. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is now also a new emerging application for diagnosis for therapy, which is also potentially very interesting for us. Our commercial approach with the product will be different than what we've done in the past. We're not going to be targeting traditional distributors or diagnostic distributors. A lot of these markets that we're focusing at, frankly, didn't exist 12 months ago. And so traditional distributors are probably not the route. So we're going to be targeting what we classify as solution or testing providers, which means companies that themselves offer a consolidated testing package to end users. So an example of that could be a testing offered in pharmacies, for example. We wouldn't target a pharmacy chain or chemist directly, but we would target one of the several service providers that have emerged over the year that now support these sort of unique testing solutions offered out of pharmacies, if that makes sense. So overall testing solution providers rather than the end users themselves. I'm now going to go through products that were on market. So the first one to cover is the GENEDRIVE 96 SARS-CoV-2 test. As I mentioned at the beginning, obviously disappointing for us last year, especially off the back of so much optimism and good performance data for the product. This was our first development of a PCR bead product using Cytiva's technology. It's given us lots of experience and know-how on beads that we're now targeting and planning to use for future products. So the product, I think, internally from R&D standpoint was successful development. And the beads and the plates have worked really well in commercial hands. But initial sales, as I mentioned, around $500,000 US. But we didn't really gain any material traction beyond that for a number of factors I think we've partially covered anyways. But I think in summary, the key elements are that by the time we got to market, there were already hundreds of suppliers. And once a tester had adopted the technology, we found it difficult, and our commercial partners found it difficult to convert people to the GENEDRIVE test. And conversion was problematic owing to the fact that customers needed to convert their entire process over to us. Our chemistry style was different, and customers often had robotic systems involved in sample prep, and it required a wholesale changeover. And unless customers had a key supply issue, it became a difficult thing to try to get customers to do. Secondly, we focused our efforts quite heavily on the American market. And while originally the FDA allowed a number of emergency use authorizations quite quickly, once they hit a critical mass, they didn't really have an incentive to approve further products. So they had sufficient sort of EUA approved products on the market to meet their current demand. And so they began to focus on approving different and alternative solutions And so we've been effectively parked, unable to get approval. So our application is still at the FDA, but I think it's probably unrealistic to expect that it will be reviewed anytime soon, or if reviewed at all. And looking forward, we continue to manage some opportunities in selected markets, but clearly these are going to be smaller than the massive opportunities that were there early in 2020. On to just to conclude on the military applications and GENEDRIVE HCV. We have the biopathogen assays that we've developed over a longer period with the US military, and that development ended in 2020, and then we moved into a commercial phase. As a result of that, we appointed Mountain Horse Solutions, which is a specialist US-based military distributor, in March of 2021. And the involvement of Mountain Horse actually has been really, really good, and given us access to a number of opportunities and requests for information that we just wouldn't have seen here from a distance. So I think they've been doing a really good job for us. And then looking forward, we see revenue opportunities coming from potentially two avenues. First, one of these multiple opportunities that Mountain Horse are able to identify and bring to us from within the US military, they're likely to be in sort of the six-figure amounts, and periodic or occasional. And then secondly, there is this large fielding opportunity that we announced back in March 20 of around 500 units. And this is still live, and we expect some resolution hopefully by the end of Q1 2022. Now, given the passage of time since that initial indication, I think, again, it's prudent to remain neutral as to whether this is going to conclude or not, conclude successfully, or whether the DoD is going to buy or not. But listen, we're working really hard with Mountain Horse to do all we can to convert this successfully for us. And the last element I'm going to cover is HCV. So we've had this, frankly, very good test validated and reviewed by a number of parties now. The latest one was the FIND study, the Foundation for Innovation and New Diagnostics, and it was really, really positively received by them. In our recent communications to shareholders, we indicated that the WHO PQ status for this product was under review. I know there is a question about this later, and I can go into a little bit more detail then, but this is because their third-party reference lab has been unable to re-verify our claim around the limit of detection. So that's sort of how sensitive the product is. It's, again, a frustrating conclusion, and we believe entirely down to the experimental protocols that the labs are using, and not really related to the performance of the GENEDRIVE device itself. But again, I'll get into that in the Q&A a little bit more. So, but key for us is that the performance of the product in places like the FIND study has been shown to be really excellent in a real-world setting, and we think that the product has an opportunity to play in the eradication of HCV. But the key thing to fueling this market is going to be the availability and supply of drugs for HCV elimination, which, especially during this COVID period, really hasn't happened. Okay, so that takes us through products that we have at the launch phase, product that we have in market. I'll hand over now briefly to Matthew Fowler, our CFO, just to go through financial status of the company.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everybody. I just have a single slide here to bring information up to date on our financials. So starting with the income statement, our revenue for the year was 700,000, and this is split pretty much equally across our military and high throughput COVID assays. Operating costs slightly reduced on the prior year, 6.2 versus 6.7, and this is mainly owing to reduced activity ever so slightly. And this gives us an operating loss of 5.5. So below this, we had a loan note on the balance sheet at the start of the year, and this was converted during H1, and conversion created a gain, which has gone through finance income, to give us a loss before tax of 1.9. And then below that, tax, loss-making tax credit, 1.2 million, giving us a loss after tax of 700k, significantly down on the prior year. Moving on to cash flow, cash consumption from operations slightly down on prior year, again related to those operating costs. Underneath this, fairly large outflow on working capital, and this essentially is the reversal of a high creditors balance at June 20, contributing to that 900,000 consumption in the year for working capital. Below this, I just mentioned taxation. So we're the recipient of the HMRC's tax scheme, which we get paid in cash, and that was 1 million from the prior year. Looking forwards, our tax credit in the P&L, the 1.161 million, we'd expect that to get paid early in calendar year 2022. So now the accounts are signed, we can submit our claim into the government. So net cash outflow from operations, 5.2. And below operations, just to reference back that convertible, some deferred interest paid on the convertible loan note, leaving us a cash consumption net for the year 5.5 and a net cash position 2.6. Just to bring that up to date post year end, we completed a fundraise that was announced in September and completed October. So the net fundraise from that was 6.6, and the unaudited cash at the end of October was 7.3 million. So June's cash was 2.6. We raised 6.6, and we have 7.3 at October, meaning the cash burn for the 4 months to October is 1.9 million. So broadly in line with our expectations and historic rates. But obviously that burn rate will adjust as we look forward to the receipts from COV-POC and our AIHL installations. Okay, so that's it. Everything on the financials. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. So just in terms of news flow, so we are rapidly approaching the end of the calendar year for 2021. So what we hope and plan to get completed by the end of the year clearly is the clinical test data available for the GENEDRIVE COVID-19 ID kit, which, as I mentioned, should be due imminently. That will support the application for the GENEDRIVE COVID-19 ID kit CE marking. And we are on track to install our first KOL sites for AIHL in the UK in December. Looking forward into the first half of next year, and to be fair, I think most of these are probably Q1 or earlier H1 activities, is the commercial partner launch for GENEDRIVE COVID-19 ID kit. So we'll be telling you about how and where we're going to market with that product. The publication for AIHL from Manchester Royal Infirmary, the performance trial data, as I mentioned, has been accepted. So that should be available very soon. I think it's probably unlikely it'll hit by the end of this year, but it probably trickle into next year. And then following the commercial partner launches, we'll be able obviously to give you sales updates on progress for that. We'll be launching AIHL into the European Union in the first half of next year, early in the first half, and the 2 military applications that I spoke about should resolve within the first quarter of next year. Okay, so that takes us to the conclusion of our presentation for today. Mark, I'll turn it back over to you, and we can take questions that have been submitted online.
That's great, David. Thank you very much indeed. And Matthew for updating investors this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you that the recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your Investor Meet company dashboard. We will notify you when that's ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after this presentation is ended, we'll redirect you in order that you can provide the company with your thoughts and expectations. Matthew, David, I know we received a number of questions ahead of today's event, and you've obviously received a number throughout today's event. Would you mind if I just hand back to you, and if I could ask you to read out the questions and give a response where it's appropriate to do so? That would be grateful, and I will pick up from you at the end.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mark. So listen, there are a good number of questions, and there are some common themes. So maybe I'll try to sort of put them together a little bit. And actually looking at the questions coming in online as well, I'm not seeing any there yet. Anyways, there are completely different than what was submitted in advance. But so let me just go through some of these for you. So I would also add that people do submit questions in advance before they've seen the presentation or before they even read the annual account. So I think a lot of questions have already been covered, but nonetheless, we can recover some ground. So the first question I have here is, can you provide more information on the commercialization profile of AIHL in the UK and across Europe? How are sales likely to evolve in terms of scale and time frame from discussions that you have had? So again, we covered some of this in the presentation, but from a financial standpoint, one thing I did want to point out again, common question, the detailed revenue placement financial expectations are in a FinCap broker note. So if people don't have that note, it is available from FinCap. You just have to register on their site to get it. If you go to the GENEDRIVE website in the investor section under analyst, there is a link from there where you can register with FinCap. Okay, so all of those things are there, and I think everybody should try to get a copy of those. But however, in summary, so AIHL in the UK, as we mentioned, is going to be driven off the back of a key opinion leader launch, right, which is currently ongoing. And by key opinion leader, we mean launching it at key sites that are going to be, advocates and references. These are the sort of thought leaders in the neonatal intensive care world, right? This is a new test that hasn't been available before, so there is an element of market development activities to do. So there's going to be a phase where adoption is going to be modest, given that people need to establish funding in some hospitals, whereas others will be able to choose just to alter internal funding mechanisms more readily, right? But we've got a real benefit launching in the UK, right? We've got clinical advocates here, strong clinical data that's been generated at a very large and well-known UK hospital. But the real key lever to aggressive growth in the UK anyways is the product being written into the Royal College of Pediatric Care guidelines, right? Because when that's done, that effectively mandates hospitals to use a product, right? And that could probably happen in a 12 to 18 month time frame that those guidelines get reviewed annually. For Europe, in some countries, the dynamics and the timing are going to be faster than that. Clinical procurement is not as centrally managed as it is in the NHS and not as centrally controlled. So, for example, our initial installation that we've got up and running now in Greece is actually a private healthcare facility, right? And they can take more commercial decisions on testing and offering this because the users are private payers. Yeah. As we move around the European Union, subsequent countries can be targeted based on their complexity, their market size, opportunity, our ability to put good commercial structure into those markets. So a number of factors, and I think in the same way that we prioritized Greece, countries that have more private access generally are going to get prioritized. Yeah, but again, in the EU, we're going to have to move through a similar key opinion leader engagement process as we are in the UK, given that this is a new product that hasn't been offered before. Yeah. Okay. Looking, the next question is, what kind of revenue could be generated next year for GENEDRIVE if the new COVID testing system currently being trialed is successful? And who would be your customers? And that was the question was submitted by Gary. So again, all of those numbers are in the FinCap note. There's a number of assumptions built into the revenue model, but we assume that distribution partners will initially take around 100 units and building to about 200 units by the end of our fiscal year. And then the model's got an additional 200 units placed the following year. And when you convert that to revenue, key things are or key, variables are when the units get installed and how many tests do they do, et cetera, and what's the pull through. But the FinCap analyst note is predicting revenue at the end of the fiscal year of around just under 3 million and then 12 million in the following year. Okay, so that gives you some sense of what it is, but again, I would urge you to get the FinCap note and pour through the detail on that. The next question is, what is now happening with Beckman Coulter? Is there an expiration on how long they host products on their website? And this question also came in on the side panel as well during the presentation. So Beckman Coulter remains a commercial partner of the company. Indeed, they retain the 96 SARS-CoV-2 product on their website. They continue to manage inquiries and opportunities, right? But as I said in the presentation, in the absence of having an EUA, and their focus on the US market, there's not a lot of point for them to continue to push the product at their events and conferences and things like that when they've got current products to sell. So they've got they are a partner of ours. They remain in place. Again, as I said in the presentation, we think it's unlikely that EUA will happen, and there is another question here. We'll go in a little bit more detail on that. Simply just due to the passage of time, right? There's no tangible thing that we can point to say, oh, it's going to happen tomorrow or next week. So it would be disingenuous for us to say that it's going to happen imminently. We just don't know. Actually, we're in the dark. Actually, the next question actually here is about the FDA. So what it says, I'm aware companies have periodic communications with the FDA and with the WHO regarding applications. What's the latest on both? So we haven't heard anything from the WHO probably in 6 or 7 months, and obviously we inquire, but we actually from WHO we literally don't get a reply. So there's nothing to update on WHO. The FDA normally just acknowledges that they've received our request, and they tell us that our application is still in the queue. On the FDA website currently, there is a review around their own evolving EUA priorities. And while high throughput PCR was very prominent in 2020, it does say on the front of their website that they're focusing most of their efforts on home testing currently. And there's also a document on there that sort of talks through around what happened last year and what their issues were in approving things. They point to things around IT management and the number of staff that they had in place, etc. So it's just been a really frustrating, difficult process. We had to really have a really good, innovative product that we tried to get into market in the US. I think if we had gotten in, it would have been an amazing result, but unfortunately, we weren't able to. So never say never, but as I said, there's no single tangible piece of information that I can point to that suggests that it's going to get beginner review tomorrow. Next question: why is more information not made available to private investors, particularly in relation to progress and problems with the products that our investment is supporting? So it's a good question. Certainly, we've gone longer periods than we would have liked to issue any news and updates, right? But it's just reflective of us not having anything material to say and to update. We've been waiting. We do work closely with our advisors and ensure that we do communicate when and where we need to, I guess. But sometimes we might be aware of risks internally of things not proceeding in a direction that we want or that we expect. But if we have opportunities to correct or modify that or do something to affect the outcome, we'll discuss with our advisors and see if we need to disclose something. But investors I don't think anyways, want us to issue RNSs about issues that we felt we have a reasonable chance of addressing or issues that aren't going to materialize, right? The reality is RNS and news can be positive and negative, but similarly in relation to positive news, we want to make sure that things are fully resolved until we announce them, right? We don't want to have to announce things and then retract information later on. The next question is around the WHO. Could you clarify exactly what concerns WHO have over HCV and what's required from GENEDRIVE now in order to ensure that the HCV is available for sale in all relevant and targeted countries? So an important part of, a part of the WHO PQ process includes them sending the product to an independent lab to evaluate your performance claims, right? So there'll be things like your product sensitivity, your performance across genotypes, your limit of detection, does the product perform the same from one operator to the other? And for the limit of detection calculation, the lab's fallen short, right? The independent lab was unable to achieve the same number that we have in our package insert. So I actually can't remember what the exact number is, but it's something like 2,800 copies per mil we say we can detect. And the lab, their limit of detection was something like 10 times higher than that, right? It wasn't really even close. which is not right, right? We know this is not a correct number. And we believe that that discrepancy is more related to the lab procedures that they used rather than the performance of the product, right? So the GENEDRIVE test only uses a few microliters of sample, right? So it's critical that when you're evaluating a limit of detection, the specimen sample has to be mixed really well, right? It has to be homogeneous, right? At our lowest level of detection, we've got 3 plastic detection tubes in our cartridge. At our lowest level of detection, there could only be 1 or 2 viral particles to see, right? And if the standard which you're measuring yourself against isn't mixed well enough that you get 1 or 2 particles in every one of the wells, then you're going to have problems. Now we don't experience that in our hands. We don't have that problem, but they weren't able to re-verify that. Yeah. So we're not sure where we're at exactly quite yet. I think it's unlikely that the WHOPQ status will be maintained. We do have the opportunity to reapply if that's what happens. But I think back to the question, WHOPQ itself is not a regulatory status in terms of being able to put your product in the market. Right? It doesn't prevent us from putting the product and selling it. So your original question was, is the test, how can the test be available in all relevant target countries? That's not related to WHOPQ. WHOPQ is around people's ability to procure it from donor money. So it primarily affects Africa, to be fair, where most WHOPQ things operate. And again, to be transparent, we'd rather have it than not have it. But not having it doesn't mean that we can't put the product to market and do what we can do to help eradicate HCV. As we mentioned in the presentation, the key factor in that market is actually the availability of drugs and funding for drugs. Next question on is, how is the double-digit million COVID test deal going with the European Ministry of Health? So in September, we already did communicate out to shareholders that was unlikely. We're not aware that opportunity has ever been awarded, unfortunately. We haven't had any updates from procurement department now for several months. So again, it's prudent to assume, as I mentioned in the presentation, that probably won't resolve. But none of that revenue does factor into any of the financial forecasts that are currently out in the market. The next question is so it's quite a long question. This is I'm sorry if I abbreviate. This is around the new UK requirements, the coronavirus test device approval process that was recently announced, and you would have seen that a number of companies had to suspend sales of their products. And I guess the question really is how does that impact us? So in respect to the UK, for any company, the requirements to put a COVID test in the UK market are now higher than elsewhere, right? It's a higher level of scrutiny than CE marking does, right? It includes things like a higher number of clinical samples that you need to look at. There are some specific performance criteria that you need to make, and there's what they call a desktop review of company documentation. So it's sort of just an expanded additional process. So for us, it means that we need to continue to recruit more clinical specimens to meet this expanded requirement, but it doesn't really affect our go-to-market strategy, because we were always intending to initially go into markets that it just accepted CE mark. Yeah, so we always expected to go into the UK a little bit later. I think with this new process, this THSC process, the key thing is it's not known what time delay this adds to anything, right? There's been no commitment from the government on review times, review periods, and again, that's applicable for every company. So, but again, for us, our focus is going to be into Europe first. We'll continue to recruit and to get to the sample size number for UK, and then we'll just go through the application process, which in theory is reasonably straightforward. It's just the time frame that's unknown. The next question is, it was expected that GENEDRIVE's point of care test would be complete and CE mark applied for in October. Shareholders have not been updated on the progress. So again, I'll just go through that during the presentation. And as I mentioned, the issue has just been the recruitment of samples. So traditionally we would just buy samples in the market, but because our test uses its own customized buffer, right? You have to take the patient, the nasal swab, put it into buffer. You need your starting material in that format. So it means that we have to proactively recruit samples at a clinical lab, and the rate of collection is really just related to the rate of COVID infection. So we're almost there. As I mentioned, we use the words imminently. We purposely chose that word. We should be there very, very, very soon. Next question here. It says, in the recent open offer, GENEDRIVE stated that $2 million will be used if sufficient funds received for US FDA approval of point of care. Our high throughput lab-based COVID test, which we spent money on to get approval since May 2020, has not got approvals. As such, is it worthwhile pulling the plug on this application? If so, is the money refundable given it was never processed? And then you could use this money for the point of care kit approval, which would give another shot at trying to put things right in regards to commercial sales. What are your thoughts on this? So there's maybe a slight confusion in the question. So the open offer at the fundraise and the ability to get to the FDA more quickly was around point of care AIHL, not COVID. So we didn't get ourselves to that point. We are very eager to get our product into the American market. We think it would be a great opportunity, but that is going to have to get funded off revenue. The FDA process for AIHL is a traditional pre-market approval process, and normally FDA, so there's no emergency status for that sort of thing. Normal FDA processes for a PMA are typically 12 to 24 months. Yeah, so there's a significant time and financial investment there, right? The FDA requires that you generate all of your performance data in America off American patients at American labs. So there's a body of work to do there around data generation, and then there's a procedure to go through with the FDA just in terms of timing. Okay. The next question is a little bit unfair. I don't know if that's the right word. If it's unfair, I guess it's a sentiment, I suppose, and so that's fair enough. It says, why do you continue to use Walbrook as your PR company, which in your last presentation you actively told investors to engage with, but they failed to add color or provide further clarity. So we're a small company, and we employ Walbrook to manage private investor questions, right? And that's what we've asked everyone to do. We receive a lot of questions into the company, and we do try our best. A lot of them we do come to us directly, and we try to answer. Some we forward to Walbrook, and a lot go to Walbrook directly. Walbrook often just provides shareholders with information that's already in the market, right, that they're unaware of. And they can clarify questions that aren't deemed to be price or market sensitive. Where they don't know the answers, Walbrook, can revert to the company. I do get emails from them asking for clarification sometimes, but in most cases, the questions are forward-looking and price sensitive, and therefore can't be answered, unfortunately, right? And I think that's probably the primary source of frustration from private investors, that they have questions and the company won't answer them, right? The reality is often we can't answer them. But in the event that you believe Walbrook should be able to answer your question and they're not, ask them to re-forward the question to the company, right? And I promise you, I'll ensure that the question gets reviewed. And if it can be answered, we'll give you an answer. Yeah. The best thing to you to do as well is to include a full name and a phone number. Is the really helpful thing for us to sort of just get back to you and sort of talk through, maybe in a bit of to really understand the question in its entirety, so that we can give you the proper answer that you're searching, or maybe explain to you why we can't give you an answer where you want one. And then the last thing, additionally, we also employ Walbrook because several of our employees have been subject to quite abusive communication from people who claim to be private investors, where they are or not, I don't know, but either through email or phone, right? And that's not good for our staff, and it's not something that we tolerate. So directing queries to Walbrook in the first instance really has allowed us to filter out some of that unfortunate communication. Okay, but there will be times where we don't disclose information, frankly, because maybe we don't want to. It's not in the interest of the company to disclose, and sometimes things are confidential, and again, we don't want to. But I'll just reiterate: if you think your question is answerable, and Walbrook, for whatever reason, doesn't think that it is, ask them to forward it to the company, and we'll take a look at it again. Just looking at time, we only have 4 minutes left, I think. I'm going to just move to this one. So this was a pre-submitted question, and I think it's important to answer because I think it encapsulates a lot of the tone of some of the questions that we had coming in. It says basically strong in R&D and weak in sales and marketing. This has been the major concern raised by some investors, that GENEDRIVE is persistently failing to commercialize R&D opportunities effectively. While part of an explanation for this event is clearly outside of GENEDRIVE's control, the situation is also partly explained by systematic weaknesses within the marketing and sales operations of the company. Do you agree with the statement? And what further can you say to reassure investors that the company has the right people, processes, and culture to fully commercialize opportunities that are being created by a strong R&D? Okay, so listen, I think it's a good and it's a relevant question, and I don't want to sound defensive because I think there's some fair criticism in there, right? We clearly can't say that we've done everything right. We had a disappointing year. We had an innovative product that we weren't able to get into market and generate revenue. So we accept the criticism. I think our R&D team will be pleased that you recognize the development capability that they have, because they have done a very good job. I think the conclusion isn't as simple as maybe the question suggests. We have partnered, in my mind anyways, with some of the biggest, most successful diagnostic companies that exist, right? We've got commercialization agreements with Beckman Coulter, with Sysmex, and commercializing is their daily bread and butter, right? And they haven't been successful either. They're either working together on their own. So it isn't all about just the commercializing capability of the GENEDRIVE team. And again, I don't want to sound defensive, but it is complicated. I think what we want to do is we want to take the lessons of last year and look forward to ensure that we don't repeat these things again, right? So, for example, registration clearances were a huge problem for us, right? We couldn't get our product into the markets that we needed to get registered in a timely fashion, right? So going forward, when we look at the 2 product launches that we have ahead of us, we're focusing on Europe, right? We've got CE marks. We don't have registration barriers there. We can get into our market, right? The commercial processes there, they're known and understood by us. You could argue that, if we're trying to sell into Africa, we don't understand commercial processes there well enough. So let's focus on the markets where we do. And maybe there's a criticism of trying to partner with big diagnostic companies that have big portfolios and lots of things that they could be doing. So I'm not 100% sure that's a valid criticism, but nonetheless, I think going forward, we are looking at more focused, smaller companies that we can partner with, and or going direct where we need to, right? There is a reality that in a big company, salespeople can switch their efforts from one product to another without too much repercussion, provided that they hit their revenue numbers. And I think trying to work with smaller companies in the countries that are familiar to us without additional registration requirements will really help us in terms of commercializing effectively going forward. Okay.
David, I might just jump in for no other reason than for every question that you're very generously answering. There's another one that comes along, and I know that there are a significant number of pre-submitted questions to which you've already provided a written response. So I guess for the interests of time, and I know particularly that investor feedback is important to you, that I maybe just jump in now, and if there is a further question that you want to go on to, or as I say, you can provide any responses post this call.
No, I think it's okay. Listen, well, maybe I could just do a quick summary.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, is that okay? So I think, just to finish off on what I was just saying there, we do have good innovative products on the market, right? And new ones at introduction stage. We're well funded. We're focusing again on the markets where we don't have regulatory hurdles. We're staying close to home. We've increased the size now of our commercial team to work alongside these distributors, and again working with smaller focused partners. So I think we have every reason to feel optimistic looking forward that we can make a success of what we have in hand.
That's great, David. Matthew, thank you for updating investors, and thank you to the investors for taking time to submit questions both ahead of today's event and during today's event. And as I said, we will make all these responses available to you where it's appropriate to do so, and we'll send you an email when it's ready for your review. Could I please ask investors now not to close this session, as we'll now redirect you to provide your feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of GENEDRIVE PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you.